Thank you. The aim of this paper is to analyze a data set of book prices drawn from a consistent group of Venetian sources. In the last 15 years of the 16th century, about 50 printed sale catalogs were published in Italy, 35 of which included prices. All prices were set in the same city, Venice, and the same currency, Venetian lire, across a limited span of time, 15 years, and circulated in the same form, printed catalogs. All of them pertain to first-hand, unbound books still in the publishers' warehouses. Drawing from these Venetian sources, a total of 3,500 records were entered in the early modern book prices database, both as total prices of copies and prices per sheets. In the database, all prices are expressed in denari, the minimum submultiple of Venetian lira, which was worth 240 denari. The corpus includes 24 catalogs printed by Aldo Manuzio the Younger, 4 by the Giolito family, 2 by the Giunti, 2 by the Scotto, 1 each by Damiano Zenaro and Niccolò Misserini. Manuzio, Giolito, and Giunti had long been the 3 most important printing dynasties in Italy. Together, they represented more than 20% of all Italian book production, and they determined and gave form to 3 different markets, namely the humanistic book, the vernacular book, and the Latin book for professionals, liturgical, law, and, in general, academic editions. We can start our analysis showing the date of publication of the editions included in the dataset. According to the absolute frequency distribution per year, this is the situation. 50% of the advertised editions were published in the period 1575-1600, making our dataset very significant not only for the backstock, but also for recently published editions. Therefore, we can starting to ask, are all the books less expensive than the newly published ones? Here, the most objective answer consists in analyzing the price per sheet in a chronological order. For each year, the value corresponds to the mean price, all sources considered. Excluding the first 50 years of editions where observations are too sporadic, we have this graph. It is clear that mean prices constantly increased. There is a slight but steady growth of the price per sheet. Whereas inflation certainly played a role, it is evident that the novelty factor influenced the prices ever more consistently. The corpus of almost 3,500 book prices includes a relevant number of duplications, especially for Manuzio and Giunti. So the real corpus on which we worked consists in 1,299 book prices, which reveals a price per sheet ranging from a minimum of 5.23 denari to a maximum of 70 denari. The mean is 13.53. Prices per copy range from 12 to 17,860 denari. Actually, an overwhelming majority of book prices, 1,249, do not exceed the sum of 5,000 denari, which corresponds to about 21 lire. Despite the great variety of books and publishers, prices are remarkably compact. The early modern book prices database was built using a data structure that mirrors the main factor which could lead a publisher to set a certain book price. By means of this database, material aspects of books, which are associated with higher costs, can be immediately detected. This is useful to grasp the possible influence of some labor costs on price setting. The language of text is the first factor. We can observe the difference between Latin and Italian. In our data set, just 4 editions in Greek and certainly no Hebrew edition are included. No production in these 2 languages was printed in Venice at that time. The following analysis will make clear the different results that can be attained using the total price versus price per sheet approach. In both cases, graphs display mean prices. The 2 green columns show the absolute number of editions, respectively in Italian and in Latin. The red dots mark the mean price. This graph illustrates how the mean price of books in Latin, which consisted mainly of academic and learned books, was more than double the price of books in Italian. Italian editions were mainly books in smaller bibliographical formats, in fewer sheets, therefore rather cheap. But when we switch the analysis to price per sheet, the result is quite different, showing that in terms of price per sheet, editions in Italian were actually more expensive. You see the position of the red dots. The average price per sheet of editions in Italian is 14.47 denari, while editions in Latin cost 13.07 denari per sheet. This means that although unitarian price was higher for Latin volumes, publishers succeeded in making Italian editions more profitable in comparison. Another straightforward but revealing indicator is linked to the format of books. It's obvious that while printing in smaller formats would reduce the cost of paper, it would have been accompanied with a growing difficulty and time-consuming process of type composition and imposition. This is the graph for prices of individual copies, so total prices. It's a largely predictable outcome. Folio books, including several multi-volume editions, were much more expensive than quartos, approximately 2.5 times as much, 5 times more expensive than octavos, and 10 times more expensive than duodecimo. For the smallest formats, we have unfortunately a limited number of observations. However, the graph of price per sheet reveals a quite different situation. Now the cheapest formats are folios. For voluminous folio books, it would not be feasible to charge a high price per sheet. Prices per sheet progressively registered a slight increase for quartos, octavos, and duodecimo. What these prices can tell us about the different clientele that the publishers targeted can be inferred from a graph that combines formats with languages. The total number of editions is in the green columns. Editions in Italian are in light blue, and editions in Latin are in yellow. Price per sheet is therefore displayed separately for all editions in red, Italian editions in light blue, and Latin editions in yellow. With regard to in folio, where editions in Italian are exceptional, the great majority of Latin folios contain everything we would expect: law and theological books, university textbooks, and so forth. All those materials that were only sporadically proposed to private customers, but rather targeted to institutions, for instance, the many educational institutions of the time and religious orders. Quartos present a very balanced situation with almost no difference between Italian and Latin. They cost the same. The Latin octavos are more numerous but cheaper than the Italian ones. The same happened regarding duodecimo books. The Italian ones were 28% more expensive than the Latin ones. This is a sign of the increasing affirmation of the duodecimo in the market of Italian books, both in devotional literature produced in large quantities in the vernacular by the Giolito firm, and in the publication of contemporary authors like Torquato Tasso, whose works were printed mostly in duodecimo, including editions of his long poem, Gerusalemme Liberata. Other factors useful for analyzing the prices are typefaces. Our dataset consists primarily of books printed in plain Roman and Italic types, 76.5%. Only 11.2% are printed in black letter and 12% in music types. Greek books account for only 0.3%. This situation leads to the following graphs, showing price per copy and price per sheet for typefaces. Here, the most interesting result involves books in Roman Italic types and music books. The first ones, which Venice printed massively for the whole peninsula and beyond, are characterized by high price for individual copies, and the price per sheet is average, not the highest, but not low either. Music printing required such a different technique, staff, and organization that had to be performed only by specialized printing shops. We are dealing here with lay and sacred music accompanied by texts offered to the market by the Scoto firm. In terms of price per copy, the Scoto music editions were the cheapest books on the market, about 1/5 of plain text in Roman and Italic types, but the price per sheet was 20% higher than that. Therefore, while the price of single copies could be kept low, these items actually were among the most expensive in terms of price per sheet and constituted a very profitable production, even if the buying public could be unaware of it. An analysis of the relationship between prices and content of the books can also be performed. By applying a simplified DDC classification to our data, we chose to highlight some sector of book production that could provide more clues about changes in the book trade in 16th century Venice. To this goal, for instance, we treated the large subject of religion, ranging from theology to collections of sermons and devotional literature in the vernacular, as separate from the public worship sector, which includes missals, breviaries, and other religious service books that have their own material characteristics, for instance, printing in 2 colors. What were Venetian book prices in relation to different subjects? To give a more nuanced picture, the answer has to be split in 2, first in terms of total prices of individual books, and then as prices per sheet of editions. Not surprisingly, Law and its voluminous editions still occupies the prices corner of the market, with a remarkable mean price per copy of almost 2,500 denarii, followed by medicine, history, and religion. These subjects are all connected with a mean price per copy above 1,000 denarii. Under 1,000 denarii, we find in this order science, but with an insufficient number of observations, Latin language and literature, public worship, philosophy, and at a great distance, music and Italian language and literature. At either end, a law book copy costs 10 times as much as an Italian book of literature, which on average costs about 220 denarii, less than 1 lira. However, prices per sheet tell a completely different story. We find the situation almost at odds with the preceding ones. Public worship was the sector in which we find top prices, almost 19 denarii per sheet. Just above, music books confirmed a remarkable price per sheet, followed by history and Italian literature books, which were the cheapest ones in terms of price per copy. All the other subjects are under 13 denarii per sheet, with Latin books followed in order by law, religion, medicine, and philosophy. The prices subject, public worship, and music publications were both specialized sectors, and their productions needed technical skills and extraordinary investments. In both cases, competitors were few and prices could be kept high. The price strategies of Venetian publishers can also be illustrated by analyzing the same data. Publishers normally focus their activity on areas where they had long secured their reputation. The following graph visualizes the division of market zones in percentages and according to subjects. Each column represents a subject and display the percentage distribution of the editions of that subject according to publishers. The number of editions per subject is different and is reported in the graph in order to highlight both absolute and relative information. We can see, for instance, that all 156 music editions are from Scoto, a firm predominant also in the subjects of philosophy and together with Giunti and medicine. Almost 80% of public worship editions are due to Giunti. Giolito's share of Italian editions reaches 60%, very close to the share of Manuzio's editions for Latin, which is 55%. 51 of the low editions are published by Zenaro. How expensive on average were the books published by the different publishers? We have to compare average prices, both in terms of prices per copy and price per sheet. This graph closely shows what could be, in reality, a contemporary buyer's experience. Let's examine just the main publishers' data. A client in a bookshop in Venice who was familiar just with individual books for sale should have known the general landscape of prices. The bulky Giunti books were placed at the highest end of the market. Aldo Manuzio was still keeping his prices relatively high, while the Giolito editions were really in reach of most buyers. Prices per sheet mirror this reality. While Giunti was selling the most voluminous books on the market, he was still able to keep the price per sheet remarkably higher than all competitors. Given that Miserini's data are too limited to be considered as reliable, only Manuzio was able to keep pace with the high prices per sheet of Giunti, while Giolito, Scoto, and Zenaro had to sell their books more cheaply. To understand the distribution of data better, we present the box plots graph, which allows us to show both the variability and the skewness of data and to compare distributions by different publishers. The prices per sheet are represented on the vertical axis and the median price per sheet by the black horizontal line in the box. The median value divides the overall distribution of prices from the minimum to the maximum in two parts, half lower and half higher than the median. The basic feature of the median price compared to the average price is that it is not affected by a small proportion of extremely large or small values. Different box lengths reflect a different distribution of the central 50% of the data within each subset. The longer the box, the more dispersed the data, and inversely, the smaller or more compact the box, the less dispersed the data. For instance, the box of Miserini highlights a great variability of prices. All the distributions are positively skewed, due also to the presence of outliers in the upper side. Here, the smallest variability of prices is displayed by the Zenaro and Giolito catalogs. The distribution for Giunti editions is far from the others, exhibiting a stronger positive skewness with a long tail of high prices and a great variability. In the simplest way, we can also represent median prices of Venetian publishers as in the following graph. While all median prices are lower than the mean ones, we see that Manuzio's median price is clearly the top one, followed by Giunti's price. Giolito's median price comes third, like his mean price, but the difference with Giunti's price is much reduced. The highest prices of Manuzio's catalogs are certainly connected to the fact that they advertised mainly newly published editions. We can infer that the three main dynasties of the Italian book trade continue to defend their prominent position on the market, where their choice of text, the value of their publisher's device, that is their brand, and their vast output, all these factors allow their books to occupy the highest level of the market. To conclude, so which was the structure of book prices in early modern Venice? In general, publishers set higher prices per sheet for texts in Italian than in Latin, for smaller formats than the larger ones, for special typefaces, for instance music, than for Roman Italic, for books of prayers than any other subject of the period. Only exceptional factors caused a real spike of price per sheet. The use of engraved illustrations, relatively rare in Venice, new content, particularly in spatial areas like architecture and medicine, exclusive permission to publish the reformed religious service books. Both publishers' average and median prices per sheet confirm a narrow range of about 4 denarii, not shifting much according to the different publishers. Prices on the Venetian market were remarkably consistent. Contrary to other European administrations, the Venetian authorities decided not to control or try to reduce prices, even when editions enjoyed a temporary monopoly thanks to the privilege. Rather, they let prices set themselves in a process free from impositions, and as we have seen from the data, the system worked remarkably well. Thank you very much.